Alright, in this Blender physics tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create something that's just kind of neat and fun to look at. And it may give you some ideas on some things you can create yourself. It's mostly kind of a teaching thing, you know, in terms of how to use certain aspects of the physics engine, and not really how to create something specifically. Alright, let me show you what this is. It's kind of like a trampoline. See how you have all these little floor tiles that kind of bounce and they absorb the shock of the balls that are falling? Now I'm going to show you how to set that up. It's actually very simple. Alright, I'm going to go to File, New, and just so you know, I am using Blender 3.6 and I'm not using any special add-on for this. Alright, first thing I'm going to do is go into front side view by pressing 1 and then make sure I'm in orthographic view. You can see whether you're in perspective or orthographic view up in the top left, and you can change by pressing 5. So I'm in front side view by pressing 1 and orthographic view by pressing 5. Alright, this right here is going to be I'm going to make my floor out of that and the floor tiles. Alright, now first thing I'm going to do is duplicate this. Shift D and then press enter, and then press G for grab, Z for the Z axis, and then 3 to bring it up to there. Now the top part, I want to keep it essentially the same size. I'll make it a little bit smaller and a lot thinner. So on the Z axis I'm going to scale it by 0.1. So I'm going to press S for scale, Z 0.1, and then enter. Now I want to make this just a little bit smaller on the X and Y axis. That way the individual tiles are not bumping up against each other. So I'm going to press S for scale and then Shift Z, and that means it's going to scale on every axis except for the Z axis, and then 0.95. So it just made it a tiny bit smaller. Now on this piece right here, I'm going to make this, I'm going to scale it on the Z axis, S for scale, Z 0.1. Alright, now I want to make this basically 25 times larger on the Y axis. So I'm going to press S for scale and then Y and then 25, enter. And I want to make this 50 times larger on the X axis. So S for scale, X 50, enter. Now I know I want to move this cube over to this corner because I want to be able to duplicate these in a way that makes it simpler and quicker. So I'm going to move this on the Y axis by 24, on the Y axis by negative 24, and that's going to put it right up against the edge. And I just know that because the math, you know. So grab Y minus 24, enter. And I need to move it on the negative X axis by 49. Grab X minus 49, enter. Now of course if you made this a different dimension, you'd have to adjust that accordingly if you wanted to duplicate them using the way I'm going to go about doing it. Alright, now what I need to do at this point, I need to make both of these objects a rigid body object. Alright, with this one selected, but before I go turning them into a rigid body object, I need to apply the scale on these objects. Otherwise the physics engine sometimes gets a little weird if the scale is not applied. And you can always see if the scale is applied right here. If all of these do not say 1, then the scale is not applied. So with one of them selected, press Ctrl A and apply the scale. See, now all of them show 1, so the scale is applied and the physics will work better. Same way with the floor. They don't show 1, So I need to apply the scale. Control A brings up this menu and choose scale. Alright. It doesn't really change anything, it just changes like the internal math of Blender. That's the only way I know how to explain it. Alright, now with the floor selected, we need to make this a rigid body object. So I'm going to come over here to the physics tab, click rigid body. Now this floor, we do not want it to fall with gravity, so we're going to change it from active to passive. Alright, and we can change this from convex hull to box. And the reason why we're going to change it to box is because anytime you can get by with something that's shaped like a box, it uses a little bit less resources to calculate the physics. But that only works on box shaped objects. If you was to take, you know, a sphere and have it calculate the collisions as a box, then it would not work right. Alright, same way with this. We need to make this a rigid body object, but this we want to keep it an active object. Now we will keep it 1 kilograms. Alright, and we'll change it to box also. Alright, now what we need to do is, with this tile selected, press Shift S and put cursor to select it. And the only reason why we're putting the cursor in the center of mass of this object is because when we add a constraint, we want to be able to put that constraint with that object. It'll make more sense here in a minute. So with this tile selected, we're going to press Shift Select and then select, or press Shift and then select this floor also, so that both of them are selected. Alright, now come up here with both those selected, come up here to Object, come down here to Rigid Body, and then choose Connect. Now, see, this is where it put the constraint, and this is why I want the center, or I wanted the cursor right here, because I'm going to select this constraint and press Shift S, Selection to Cursor, because we're basically telling it to move that object to the cursor. Now, press 1 to go into front side view and make sure you're still in orthographic view. Now we're just doing this part to make it easier to visualize what's going on. So I'm going to, with just this constraint selected, I'm going to press G for grab and then Z for the Z axis, and then just move it right in the center. Doesn't have to be perfect, but just right inside the center of this floor. Alright, now what we want to do, we want to keep this constraint selected, come over here to the rigid body constraint settings, and then change this from fixed to generic spring. And you have a whole lot of settings in here, but suffice it to say, the only thing we want this constraint to do is allow this object to bounce. So what we need to do, we need to go ahead and select all the angular and then set every one of these to 0, because we're basically saying we do not want it to be able to rotate on the X axis or the Y axis or even the Z axis. We're basically locking it in. Alright, on the linear, which linear is in the direction of the Z, in the direction of the X, and in the direction of the Y. We don't want it to move on the X axis at all, so we're going to set both of these to 0. And on the Y axis, we do not want it to move, so we're going to set that to 0 also. Now on the Z axis, we do want this object to be able to move in the Z axis. So, but we don't want it to be able to bounce up past this point. So what we want to do, we want to check Z axis and then take the upper limit and set that to 0, which basically means this right here is as high up in the z-axis as it will allow it to go. Now if we have this set to -1, it means it will allow it to bounce down 1 meter, essentially, basically from here to here. But we want it to be able to bounce basically from here, 1, 2, and then like 2.5, so it can get all the way down to about right here if it needed to. So we'll set this to minus 2.5, and that will allow it to bounce down to about right here if something hits it. Now if I was to press play right now, see, it just falls to that point. And the reason why it falls is because at this point we have no stiffness or dampening setup. So with all these others, with the angular we don't have to mess with the linear we don't have to mess with the X and Y, we only have to mess with the Z. So choose Z, and then I know from experience that we'll probably need to set this to about 10,000. Alright, and this right here, we'll set this to 10. So basically it's going to have a stiffness of 10,000. I don't know what that equates to. I think it's 10,000 grams. That would be my guess, but I'm not 100% sure. And the dampening, I'm just going to set it to 10, just something a little bit more than nothing. And that's pretty much it. Now if I was to press play, see, it just pretty much stays there. Now what I want to do at this point, add mesh, and I'm just creating a test object and just using a cube. And this cube I'm going to grab on the z-axis and bring it up to about right here. You can see it's right above that tile, right? Now I'm going to make this cube a rigid body object, and it just weighs 1 kilogram. So if I press play, it's going to fall, hit that, and see, it just barely moved it. So I'm going to raise this up to 10 kilograms. See what I mean? It's basically allowing it to bounce off of it. I'll raise it up to 100. And this is just so you can kind of get the idea of what that constraint is doing. See how the heavier the cube is, the more it compresses it down. Alright. Set it to 1000. Alright. So that looks about right. But I'm going to set it to 100 because it's probably more realistic. If we knew we was going to be using heavier objects, we would have heavier objects than 100 kilograms. We would have to make the spring stiffer. But there's also this thing you can do to make the spring stiffer. You can basically go to your rigid body world settings, and if you was to increase the sub steps to let's say 1,000, well not 1,000, that'd be way too high. I'm thinking about the solver iterations. Set it to 20, then it's going to be a little bit stiffer. See what I mean? Not a lot stiffer, but it is a little bit stiffer. Same way if you set the solver iterations to like 100, it's sometimes a little bit stiffer. It's definitely a little bit more stable. Alright, but basically I'm going to set this back to 10, and I'm going to set this to 50 because it actually needs to be around 50 in my opinion. Alright, now I'm going to get rid of this cube right here because we was just creating that as a test object. So now select this constraint and then shift select that tile piece, that way they're both selected. Now press 7 to go into top side view, and this right here is 50 meters this way and 100 meters this way. So we're going to make 25 duplicates going this way. Alright, so what we want to do at this point is, see, we have the constraint and the tile selected. So I'm going to press Shift D Y 2 enter, and essentially all that did was duplicate both the constraint and the tile, it duplicated it and moved it 2 meters on the y-axis. So if I now press Shift R, it basically repeats the same thing I just did. So I can press Shift R over and over and over until it basically duplicates them all the way to the end. Alright, now I'm going to press 1, and I need to select all these tile pieces and all these constraints. The easiest way to do that is to select the floor and press hide. That way we get that out of the way. And then just press B for box select and select it like that. Simple enough. Now we need to duplicate this essentially 50 times going this direction. So what we're going to do is press 7 to go on the top side view, press Shift D, X, 2, enter, and essentially we just duplicate every one of them, including the constraints, and moved it 2 meters to the right on the x-axis, or 2 meters on the x-axis, right? See what I mean? Now if we press Shift R, it repeats what we just did. So that's 1, 2, 3, and we need to go up to 50. So that's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50. Alright, and I was just pressing Shift R over and over and over. Now if we press Alt H, and it unhides everything that was hidden, and we can see that now we got the floor and the tiles match on the x-axis and the y-axis. So we duplicated it the correct number of times. Alright, simple enough, right? Now if we was to add mesh and then like a UV sphere, it adds it right here. I'm going to press S for scale and then 4, enter, and I'm going to press Control A because I want to apply the scale since this is a rigid body object. Go over here to the rigid body settings, keep it set to active, set this to, let's say, 100 kilograms, and set this to sphere. And then now I'm going to grab this, bring it up to about right here, go on the side view by pressing 3, and then just grab it and bring it towards the middle. And now if we was to press play, see it falls, it hits and bounces off of it like a bunch of springs. Alright, now if we want to speed this up a little bit because the scales on these are pretty big. I mean, this sphere is like 8 meters in diameter. That's pretty big. So we'll take and go to the rigid body world settings and speed it up to 3. And now if we press play, speeds a little bit faster. It makes a little bit more sense. And you can see how the floor is absorbing the impact. Alright, now let's duplicate this. Actually, let's make this a little bit heavier first. Set this to 500. Let's see how that falls. That compressed almost all the way. See how it bottomed out. So we know we're too heavy. So let's bring it back down to like 200. Probably still a little bit too heavy. Probably 100 may end up being just right. Yeah, let's go back to 100. I was probably right at first. Yeah, that looks better. 100 was right from the beginning. Alright, now let's press Shift D and let's just duplicate this a few times. Now let's select multiples of these and go to side view, Shift D, Shift D. So now we have a whole bunch of balls, and press play. And there you go. Nothing real fancy, just basically teaches a little bit about what's going on in terms of the physics engine, more specifically how to use a generic spring, which can be used for so many different things. Now just for fun, let's do this. We'll press A twice until nothing is selected, and then I'm going to press B for box select and then left click and select the entire floor. Now I'm going to press R for rotate, and I'm just going to put a little bit of an angle on here. Now I'm going to press 3 for side view and then press R for rotate, so it's just leaning to the left and leaning towards our view now, and we'll see what that looks like. Now in this case I'm going to press 5 to bring it into perspective view, and I'm just going to select one of the spheres so we have a better view of what the floor is doing, and I'm going to press play. Now with this being an angle, the balls will tend to bounce and want to go off one direction. And believe it or not, this is essentially the fundamentals of how you go about building a suspension for a car. It uses a lot of the same techniques. It definitely uses the same generic spring. But yeah, I think this is kind of interesting looking. I like the way the dynamics of it works. But anyway, I hope you found this tutorial useful, and guess that's it. Later, people. Oh, if you have any questions, don't forget to leave a comment, because I try to reply to everyone, especially if they have questions. I try to explain it better to them, because I know I don't always explain stuff all that well. But anyway, later, people.